Now, in today's study, we're going to be going over the life of Isaac. In the previous study, we went over the life of Isaac's father, Abraham. If you have not viewed that prior to this one, I would strongly recommend watching Abraham, the friend of God, our study over Isaac's father first. But let's give a quick recap over what we have went over. Abraham would hear promises from God. One of the most crucial and miraculous was that his wife, Sarah, would bear a son, even though Sarah was well over childbearing age. Isaac's mother, Sarah, would be 90 years old, well past childbearing age, and Abraham would be 100 years old, and this would be the beginning of the Old Covenant leading up to Christ. And what God wanted was to work a miracle, and I believe he intentionally did the miracle through those of old age in order to represent that of the Old Covenant as we now know it. And then the New Covenant, some 2,000 years later, would be through that of Mary, a virgin, which would be young, untouched, unblemished, and that is whom Christ would be miraculously born of, being the New Covenant. But let's rewind back to Isaac real quick. So important was the news of this promised child, who would be named Isaac, that God himself visited Abraham in human form in order to reinforce the promise he made to them. Genesis 18 tells us, "And the Lord said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. In a year's time Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. She wasn't able to have children anymore. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? Sarah laughed just as her husband Abraham had laughed before her whenever he first heard this news that Sarah would bear a child. Because just as Christ would be born of a virgin, Mary, it's such an unbelievable natural occurrence that they just laughed within themselves at it. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laugh not, for she was afraid. Now, just as this is depicting right here, she's not out there in the conversation with the men. The women wouldn't participate in conversations with a group of men. But she says this, she believes in private, and the Lord, he knows all things. And so he knows that she says this within her heart, and the Lord replies to her, and he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. Genesis 21 then goes on to tell us about Isaac, the promised child, being born around a year after the Lord's visit, Sarah being 90, Abraham 100 years old. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. A few years after the child's birth did Abraham throw a great feast for him, and Sarah would then see Ishmael, Abraham's first child that he had with Sarah's handmaid Hagar. Ishmael was mocking Isaac, apparently around the time of the feast held for him. Sarah then convinced Abraham, along with God's guidance, to cast out the handmaiden Hagar with her son Ishmael, as there would be an obvious strife beginning to grow between the two. Some years later, God would test Abraham's faith by telling him to take his only son, Isaac, his promised son, to the land of Moriah, near Jerusalem, just right outside of Jerusalem, right at the place where Christ was crucified, we believe, to the land of Moriah, and sacrifice him for a burnt offering. The next morning, Abraham set off on a 3 days' journey to the land of Moriah, bringing with him 2 of his servants, wood for the sacrifice, and his only son, Isaac. On the 3rd day, Abraham ordered his servants to stay behind while he and Isaac journeyed up Moriah. Isaac then asked his father where the sacrifice was. As they had the wood and fire, Abraham replied, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, as he would through Christ later on. That was a prophetic utterance, and Abraham probably didn't even realize it at the time. And it is believed by some that Isaac, he wasn't just a boy at this time. He may have even been around 30, 33 years old, just like Christ was around 33 years old whenever he was crucified. Only moments before Abraham follows through with the sacrifice, the angel of the Lord, as we're told, called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And just as we went over in the last study, this angel of the Lord was most certainly the pre-incarnate Christ, the angel of the covenant, as he's called. And this utterance to Abraham, "Abraham, Abraham," the doubling of the name, was how God usually addressed the prophets and so forth. Moses, Moses, Samuel, Samuel. So it is believed that the pre-incarnate Christ is actually the one that stopped the hand of Abraham that day. "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." The Lord then provided a ram whose horns were caught in a thicket to be offered in place of Abraham's son Isaac. And we go over all of these similarities. As you'll notice, this thicket representing it's foreshadowing the crown of thorns that would be placed upon Christ's head on the day of crucifixion. We go over all of these similarities in my video, 30 plus similarities between Isaac and Jesus. We also have a video, 60 plus similarities between Joseph and Jesus. I highly recommend all of those. The Lord then spoke a second time, telling Abraham that because he would not have spared his only son, God would thereby multiply his seed so that all nations of the world would be blessed through him. And this would be through Christ some 2,000 years later. And notice the somewhat strange closing to this prophecy. Genesis 22:17 tells us, "And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies." And just like Paul the Apostle in the book of Galatians, he says, notice how seed, not seeds, indicating many, is mentioned in cases like this. And Paul the Apostle says in these types of instances, the seed is pointing towards Christ. Genesis 23 goes on to tell us of Sarah's death, the mother of Isaac, her death at 127 years old, and Abraham's negotiating with Ephron the Hittite for her place of burial. And just as we went over in our previous study over the life of Abraham, Sarah is the only woman in the Bible whose age at death is recorded in the entire scripture, 127 years old. This gives us some measure of how highly she is regarded in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible are we told to look to Mary, the mother of Jesus, as an example of a godly woman, but twice we are told to look to Sarah as such an example in both the Old and New Testament. In the next chapter, Genesis 24 then tells about Abraham sending his eldest servant, believed to be Eliezer, to find a wife for his son Isaac, not of the Canaanites, but of his own kindred. The servant of Abraham then took 10 camels and journeyed to Nahor. He then sat down beside a well outside the city and prayed that God would give him a sign as to Isaac's wife. And this is the sign that he put forward as to who this woman would be. A woman that would give both him and the 10 camels drink. Then came out suddenly a young woman, beautiful as we're told. Then came out suddenly Rebekah, who was very fair to look upon. The servant requested she give him drink. She did, then offered to give his camels drink as well. So Rebekah gives Abraham's servant drink, and then while she's giving the camels drink, we read in Genesis 24:21, "And the man, wondering at her, held his peace. He remained quiet while observing her, to wit, whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not." He's kind of astounded that the Lord would fulfill this sign so quickly. "And it came to pass, as the camels had done drinking, that the man took a golden earring of a 1/2 shekel weight, and 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold, and said, Whose daughter art thou? Tell me, I pray thee, is there room in thy father's house for us to lodge? And she said unto him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, which she bare unto Nahor. Now this is telling both of them, because the servant giving her these golden bracelets and such, he's showing her that he's a man from wealth, but he's not giving her specific details. He's wanting to know whether she is of the kindred of Abraham. And right here she's telling him, yes, I am of the kindred of Abraham, and unknowing to her. She said moreover unto him, we have both straw and provender enough and room to lodge in. And it's at that point that the man bowed down his head and worshiped the Lord. He realizes this is a kindred of Abraham. Surely this is the promised wife of Isaac. The servant went on to tell Rebekah of his commission from Abraham, which prompted her to run and inform her family. Now, both of these families would have been very wealthy at this time, so she's not looking to just marry into money, but knowing that this is Abraham's son Isaac, and whom would inherit everything from Abraham. Abraham is a powerful man at this point, very wealthy, and she knows that in marrying Isaac, though she doesn't know what he looks like, at least he would be a very rich man. That night, the servant told Rebekah's family, including her brother Laban, all that had transpired since he was given the commission from Abraham. He tells her about how he was sent by Abraham. He gives them all the details. Her father Bethuel and Laban, her brother, then replied, Behold, Rebekah is before thee. Take her and go, and let her be thy master's son's wife, as the Lord hath spoken. The servant then praises God once again, because all of this is just flowing like water. And there's a great reason for this, because the Lord knows the great importance of Isaac having a promised wife in whom he could bear seed, because the Christ would come through the seed of Isaac. So this is very, very important of a time. The next morning, Rebekah's mother and brother asked if Rebekah could remain at least 10 more days with them before her departure. The servant reminded them of his haste to return to Abraham. They then left the decision up to Rebekah, who agreed to return with Abraham's servant. And this is a very natural response, the mother, and they would all miss Rebekah, and she would be moving quite the ways away, weeks, if not a couple of months away from them. But Rebekah would not just be going by herself. Rebekah and her damsels, as we're told, then set off with Abraham's servant on the weeks-long journey, and some believe it took even, as I said, a couple of months. Isaac was located at that time in the south country and went to meditate in a field. Now this would be in the area of Beersheba. Rebekah then saw Isaac far off and asked Abraham's servant, What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant said, It is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. Now this was signifying that she was the bride. Brides would always appear to their husbands as she's been given in marriage at this point, and they would always appear unto their husbands veiled, not just their face, but even their body. Shortly afterward, Isaac, at the age of 40 years old, as Scripture tells us, Isaac at the age of 40 years old married Rebekah. Genesis 25 then tells us of Abraham's death at 175 years old. Both Isaac and Ishmael would lead the service, burying their father in the cave of Machpelah near his wife Sarah. Verse 11 then tells us, And it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi. But his wife Rebekah was barren, much like Sarah his mother before him. His wife Rebekah was barren. Isaac therefore prayed unto God, and she conceived. Now this would be 20 years worth of praying, because Isaac, as we're about to find out, would be 60 years old at the time of Esau and Jacob's birth. So after 20 years of faithful prayer for a child, Rebekah does become pregnant, and the children struggled within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? Why is this happening? Why are these? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now these 2 nations the Lord is telling Rebekah about would be Esau, these Edomites descending from him. So the Edomites and Jacob bringing about the Israelites. And as you can see, Edom would be located to the south of Israel. The old Bible commentators of Cambridge commented at this point, the subjugation of the Edomites to fulfill this prophecy The subjugation of the Edomites by the Israelites took place in the days of King David, many hundreds of years later, in 2 Samuel 8:14. Verse 24 then tells us of Genesis 25, "And when Rebekah's days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau." He would have an abnormal amount of hair growth upon him, which does happen to children even to this day. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 old when she bare them. So Jacob grabbing onto the heel of his brother. Now the meaning behind these names is quite important to know. Esau means hairy, and this is believed to denote his wild nature, not just his appearance, but he would be a manly man, of the world and such. But Esau means hairy, and Jacob, heel catcher, in essence, supplanter. The old Bible commentator Adam Clark noted Jacob because it was found he had laid hold on his brother's heel, which was emblematic of his supplanting Esau many years later and defrauding him of his birthright, as we're about to learn. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. Now, all that means is that Jacob was much more of the philosopher type, giving over to studies and whatnot. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And one day Jacob sawed pottage, he was cooking soup, if you will, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." You want this bowl of soup? Give me your birthright, which was everything to the firstborn. The birthright was everything that was included with the heir of their father, namely the succession to the earthly inheritance of Canaan, possession of the covenant blessing transmitted through the paternal benediction, and progenitorship of the promised seed. Under the Mosaic Institute, the privileges of the firstborn were clearly defined. They involved succession to the official authority of the father, a double portion of the father's property, and the functions of the domestic priesthood, as well as the Messiah will come through that lineage, as the blessing and promise would be passed down to whoever inherited the birthright. And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He didn't care anything about spiritual things, carrying on the lineage. All he cared about was the moment, worldly things, and he so is emblematic of the worldly man. Genesis 26, verse 1 then begins like this, "And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar." Now Abimelech, much like the title of Pharaoh and Ahasuerus and all of these titles, it's not necessarily a name, because we know about Abraham, he knew of this Abimelech, king of Gerar, as well, but this is believed to be one of his successors by this point. Verse 7 then tells us, "And the men of the place asked him of his wife, and Isaac said, She is my sister," just like his father Abraham told Sarah, "She is my sister," for he feared to say, "She is my wife," lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window, and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. He was flirting with her, playing with her, obviously in a manner that a brother wouldn't do to his sister. And Abimelech called Isaac, and said, "Behold, of a surety she is thy wife, and how sayest thou, She is my sister?" And Isaac said unto him, "Because I said, lest I die for her." And Abimelech said, "What is this thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us." And they fear the Lord. It's amazing how in Genesis, and we went over this in our Abraham study, it's amazing how in Genesis the people are so aware of the God of Abraham. It's not just Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Joseph that know about the true and living God. It's everyone in the whole world. They know about the Lord. Many of them, though, are idolaters. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great, and went forward, and grew until he became very great, for he had possession of flocks, and possession of herds, and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them, and filled them with earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we. They actually believed that Isaac posed a threat unto them. That's how much that the Lord was blessing Isaac and all of his family. Isaac's servants were then ordered to dig other wells. And we're told in Scripture about how once Isaac would have a fresh well dug, the men of Gerar would strive with his herdsmen, claiming the water belonged to them. They were finally able to dig another well called Rehoboth, and this one could be kept in peace. Afterwards would Isaac move to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. So the very same promise that God gave unto his father Abraham now is being passed down to Isaac. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Then Abimelech the king approached Isaac, desiring an alliance and peace to be among them. Isaac agrees. Another well was dug afterwards. Isaac called it Sheba, renewing the former name of the land called Beersheba, that Abraham his father had named, but apparently it had fell out of circulation among people, and the old name may have came back into usage, so Isaac is just renewing this. And this would be, Beersheba would be the southernmost border of Israel, the land that would come to be known as Israel in the time of David, Solomon, and all of these. We're then told in verse 34 of chapter 26, And Esau, Jacob's brother Esau, was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemoth, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Now these are Canaanite women. And this was in stern disobedience to what Abraham had commanded his descendants. Don't take of the Canaanites any women. And Jacob, he has no wife at this point. And just as the next verse denotes, Isaac and Rebekah were very displeased with Esau taking on these two Canaanite wives, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. Many years later, when Isaac was believed to be around 137 years old, thinking he was about to die, now Isaac, he would live until the age of 180, so apparently some affliction had struck Isaac at that time, and he did believe that he was about to die, but he apparently healed up after this. But this is what happens during this time. He told Esau to go hunting and bring him venison to eat. Afterwards, would he give him the blessing from father to heir. Now, this was the blessing. This would make him the heir to all of Abraham's possessions, the lineage, and all this. Charles Ellicott commented at this point, Here Isaac resisted the Spirit of God, for the clear warning had been given that the elder should serve the younger. Esau would indeed serve Jacob. Isaac may have been moved to this act by indignation at the manner in which Esau had been induced to sell the birthright. Isaac may have been angry at Jacob for his trickery. And in annulling that sale, he would have been within his rights, as he would probably have thought. But he was not justified in disregarding the voice of prophecy, nor in his indifference to Esau's violation of the Abrahamic law and marrying heathen women. There's all types of red flags that go up about Esau that Isaac clearly ignores. He despised his birthright. He marries Canaanite women that do not fear the Lord. And the fact that Isaac did this in secret indicates most likely that he likely knew that what he was doing was wrong. Isaac's wife Rebekah then overhears Isaac's request to Esau and goes about scheming with Jacob, telling Jacob to bring her 2 young goats from the flock. She would cook a meal like Isaac was expecting and take Esau's clothing Esau's clothing, as well as the fur from the goats, and covered Jacob with them so as to deceive the practically blind Isaac. Chapter 27, verse 19 continues, And Jacob said unto his father, Jacob comes in with this goat's fur around his arms and around his neck, and with Esau's clothing. And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. And this clearly denotes a dysfunctional family environment. None of them really trust another. They're all kind of seemingly at war with one another, if you will, all the time. And Isaac said unto his son, Jacob, How is it that thou hast found it so quickly, this venison, my son? And he said, Because the Lord thy God brought it to me. Now we start to see the evil within Jacob's heart at this time, and he would have this trickery within him until God would change him into another man named Israel and give him another heart. And Isaac said unto Jacob, Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him, and said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And his father Isaac said unto him, Come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. He's smelling of the clothing of Esau. Isaac then goes on to give Jacob the blessing from the father to the heir. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's son bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Then did Esau return, just as the blessing was completed for Jacob, and after his brother's treachery was realized, Esau wept bitterly, begging Isaac, Surely you have another blessing for me, because remember, Esau, he has no regard for spiritual things, so he just says, well, go ahead and bless me, who cares? And it's no different to him than just walking about out there hunting deer. It's just, well, just give me the blessing, it's no big deal. But it's a huge deal in the spirit world. Esau then in his anger erupts, and he says in his heart, I will kill Jacob once that my father has died. Because they all believe that he's going to die, but he would live nearly 50 years longer than that. But Rebekah, hearing about Esau's wrath, Rebekah then orders Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. Before his departure, as Scripture tells us, Isaac blessed Jacob again and told him to choose one of the women of their own kindred in Haran. Go there and choose a wife over those of the Canaanites. Don't make the same mistake that your brother Esau had made. And Esau, he overhears this, knowing then that his father was displeased for him taking on these two Canaanite wives. After realizing the displeasure his father had for him marrying two Canaanite women, Esau sought out and married a woman from Isaac's brother Ishmael's family. He believes, well, I'll go and marry one of the kindred of Abraham as well, being the descendant of Ishmael and so forth. So he does that in hopes to gain his father's pleasure, but he's already taking on many wives and all of this. The next 43 years of biblical history go silent concerning Isaac, while the focus moves on to his son Jacob. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father unto Mamre, near Hebron, unto the city of Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And Isaac gave up the ghost, and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. By the end of his life, Esau and Jacob, they had already reconciled, and just as Isaac and Ishmael had buried Abraham, so do his two sons lead the service in burying him.